So hi to everybody. Today's topic is ancient ethics for today's healers. And that's a very unique perspective on the work that we're all doing. Before I get into introducing Jerry and this topic, I want to just take a moment to tell you about NERI Press. As some of you know, our mission is to share cutting-edge research and best practices emerging in our field. Unlike many publishing companies, all of us here are professionals who work in the field, but we can do our work a lot better if we have your input and feedback. So we would appreciate all the suggestions that we receive from you. For many years, NERI Press was a book distributor organization, but with changes in the publishing world, while we still produce books, we're exploring what it means both to maintain our mission, but to move forward with a broader definition of our work, which is to be a knowledge dissemination system. And in the last 5 years, we've begun to offer online courses, newsletters, and now most recently these webinars by some of our internationally recognized authors. I'm going to talk a little more about this at the end of the webinar, but if you find these webinars helpful, we hope you'll consider becoming a sponsor of this series. So here comes the marketing pitch. This webinar series is very much like National Public Radio. It's your donations that help make it happen. And like NPR, we entice you into becoming a sponsor by offering you a free gift, which is 2 of our books, Current Perspectives and Current Applications, which you'll get for free if you become a sponsor, and that more than covers the cost of your sponsorship. So truly, this kind of support allows us to continue to bring all these free resources to you, and we hope you'll consider becoming a sponsor. So this is Jerry's latest book that we're going to be talking about, Ancient Ethics. And let me tell you a little bit about my experience with Jerry. I picked him up once as he was headed to our MESAC conference, and on the way, we somehow found our way to talking about spiritual topics, and I realized that I had somebody who was a very deep thinker with very unique experiences. I then was attending an ATSA conference where Jerry was introducing Native American presentation, and I thought he did the most amazing job of bridging cultures and time zones and different kinds of philosophies that I had ever heard. And so at some point, we got to know each other better and talked about producing Jerry's first book, which was Ancient Ways. But let me talk about ancient ethics. Jerry draws from both ancient wisdom traditions of the earliest shamanic healers and sacred principles of indigenous medicine people. He offers best practice guidelines for contemporary psychotherapists to traverse the modern and ancient healing path. In Ancient Ethics for Today's Healers, Jerry embraces a deeply humane and passionate practice, and he challenges all of us to embed ourselves in indigenous thinking. This is not just work that happened for thousands of years in ancient history. It's something that really needs to inform the way we work today, and I really look forward to see how Jerry is going to bring us to that point. It's what Native Americans refer to as the original instructions. From the rainforests of the Amazon that I happen to share a trip with Jerry that he's going to be talking about, to the African savannas, Jerry has encountered some of the most intriguing and enlightening tribal elders who will help inform your mind and hopefully open your hearts as well. Ancient Ethics for Today's Healers will take you on a very unique journey around the world in search of what Jerry's calling your guiding North Star. Now, as with every workshop or training, some objectives. First, to provide a provocative example of recent ethical dilemma in the Amazon jungle that can inform urban Western practices. Secondly, to underscore the core elements of enduring indigenous healing practices and apply them in the modern psychotherapy setting. And third, to challenge all of us psychotherapists to move away from narrow technical and mechanical protocols while adding soul, passion, and reverence to the healing arts. The second housekeeping detail is to let you know that this PowerPoint and Jerry's work will be posted on the Neary Press website. Actually, it already has been. And we'll be posting a recording of the webinar next week. When the workshop is over, for all of you listening, please be sure to close out your account. We'll be sending you an evaluation, and again, we would truly love your feedback. We grow, we change based on our audience, and we really would appreciate your giving us some honest feedback. And after about a week, we'll be sending you a follow-up email that has a link to the recordings and a link to the certificate of completion. While we can't yet offer you CE credits, we hope to do that in the future. You can get a certificate that says you attended this webinar. So we're at a point now where I get to have fun introducing our guest speaker, Dr. Geral Blanchard. And for those of you who don't know him, Jerry has practiced as a psychotherapist for 40 years with victims and perpetrators of interpersonal violence. He's the author of a groundbreaking book entitled The Difficult Connection, The Therapeutic Relationship in Sex Offender Treatment. And he often pushed the envelope with his work in restorative justice, and he co-wrote a book with Rob Longo on a public health approach to sexual abuse prevention called Sexual Abuse in America. And then he traveled to Africa, and one encounter with a shaman there changed his world forever. And I'm thrilled that he's sharing what he's learned and how that might help transform all of our work. We're very lucky to have him speaking with us today. And with that, Jerry, I'm going to turn it over to you. And thank you for bringing ancient traditions into contemporary practice, and ironically doing that through 21st century technology. It's all yours.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Just when you were talking about visiting Africa and the shaman there, goosebumps just went over my whole body. I felt electrified. So thank you for those kind remarks. Today, in introducing some of the concepts of the new book, Ancient Ethics for Today's Healers, I'm going to use a storytelling tradition, the tradition that you oftentimes find Native Americans using when they're trying to instruct and gently advise people. And this is different than PowerPoints in general, but when I've been before Native audiences, oftentimes they have referred to PowerPoints as sleep aids. And so in addition to sleep aids today, I want to do some storytelling, which hopefully will bring to life some of the questions that I'd like you to grapple with. And so they are some of the questions that both Stephen and I grappled with in the Amazon in February. And I must say, I've also returned to the Amazon again in July to follow up on some of the work Stephen and I did there. This is a talk, initially a story about a shaman named Raphael and a patient that I shared with Raphael whose name was Juan Fidel. And the story is replete with ethical dilemmas and challenges to conventional thinking, provocative concepts. And I hope you'll, as you listen to the story, imagine how you might have handled the situation we found ourselves in, what decisions you might have made, how you would have been challenged with your conventional training. What I'm not going to give you today is I'm not going to give you a host of thou shalt nots, but rather just some respectful consideration of time-tested ancient healing principles that are not only effective, but anchored in a sacred unifying cosmovision, as they say in the Amazon. I also believe these ideas are very practical in their application, and that's why I wrote the book Ancient Ethics, to translate this into an action plan. So let's journey, as I did with your host, Stephen Benjes, to the Ecuadorian Amazon, and create a fusion of the old and the new, as told in the new book. In front of you now is one of the shamans I met on that first trip to Ecuador. This man's name is Raphael. He was the man who was helping to heal an individual whose name was Juan Fidel. And in our meeting with this man, Raphael, it was suggested that, being healers from another country, perhaps we might be interested in going to the sacred waterfall, where shamans go to enhance their power. Raphael said, that's the place where deceased ancestors, I should say, and power animals congregate. Historically, they come to the waterfall, and by being there, we can gain some of their power for healing. So Stephen and I said, that sounds interesting. Let's go. And we had just gone through an incredible torrential downpour because we were in the rainy season in the Amazon. And so we canoed for a time on a turbulent river. We got off onto the shore and then hiked in our knee-high boots through the mud to the waterfall. And there, Raphael took us to the base of the fall, had us strip down. No slides on that. Sorry, Stephen. And we were given black tobacco mixed with spit, with saliva, with a little bit of water. We were to turn our heads back and snort it up our nose. Well, I went along with it because I had seen in other countries as well that this tobacco was used to enhance dreams. And this is a dream culture we were visiting. So we did that. We got underneath the waterfall and felt the turbulent power of the falls going over our head. When that was finished, we returned to our camp just before dark, and we crawled into our tents for the night. And we were told that in customary Achuar fashion, we would get up at 4 a.m. the next morning and recount our dreams. So at 4 a.m., we were awakened, and with our headlamps on, we walked through the jungle to the hut of Ernestino. And there you drink, at the dream circles, you drink massive amounts of Wayasa tea. This is a highly caffeinated beverage, and you fill yourself right up to your throat until you vomit. And that is a daily cleansing ceremony that they have in the jungle. That would be something in the DSM-5 here, but it's a sacred part of their culture. Then they shared dreams in circle, and as we were walking to the hut, talking to ourselves, I said, I don't think I had a dream. Stephen said, I don't think I had a dream. And then all of a sudden, it flashed into my mind. I did. And it was significant to me. And so when we sat down to share the dreams, I was asked to recount it. And it was a dream of me being with my family in an older home I had in the forest. And my father, who is now deceased, was in the dream. And he came out of a back room. And I must tell you that my father had Parkinson's and couldn't walk or talk toward the end of his life. But there he was coming out of this back room, walking under his own power, dripping wet with water. And I could hear water coming from that back room. He staggered by the family, and we all just let him walk, struggling with walking because he had pride in his ability to walk again. But my curiosity from the dream was to go back to that room and look out. And out the doorway, and sure enough, there was a pond outside of the bedroom door. That pond had fish swimming in it. And also I noticed coming out of the water was a white bear approaching me, a power animal. So now we had the ancestral visit. We had the power animal. I fell to my knees in the dream, reached out with my arms open, and the bear came up to me and we embraced. And this wasn't just any bear. This was a white bear, but not a polar bear. This is a white bear, but not an albino. It's what they would say in British Columbia is a spirit bear, the white black bear. And it's thought to have strong healing powers and abilities. Well, when I shared that dream to the group, and word got back to the shaman, I was told that the dream indicated I was infused with power, and that there was a man by the name of Juan Fidel who was there visiting in the community after taking a horrible fall in a canoe. And he was brought by community members for Raphael's healing, but nothing was working. He had been there for a week, and his condition worsened. And when Stephen and I approached the hut, where we found Juan Fidel in the upper left corner of this hut you're now viewing, we saw a man who couldn't sit up, a man who was having a hard time breathing, his breath very shallow. And Raphael said to me, now you must heal him. You have the power. We learned that the man had not only fallen in the canoe, but he had so much pressure in his brain, so much pain, that he could no longer sit up. He could no longer walk because of the pain. He couldn't urinate or defecate because of the pressure it would add to his brain. Stephen and I wondered, non-physicians as we are, does he have some sort of brain edema? Is there bleeding of the brain? It sounds like an incredible amount of pressure inside his brain. So our mind went to Western solutions immediately. But the weather was such that they couldn't fly planes in. We didn't have radio communication to even call for one. But we knew what we would do in the West. We would rush him off to hospital. We have functional brain images done. We might have brain surgery. And Juan Fidel would have none of it, nor would Raphael. Because in their belief system, Western healing usually kills people. And they said, we will stay here. Yeri, you will heal Juan Fidel. So I was thinking fast, what am I going to do here? What can I do? And I thought, well, what do I write about? I wrote about Indigenous healing in the book Ancient Ways. What did I tell people? And then the ideas started coming to me. I was almost intuiting information. It just funneled into me. And I realized that one of the things shamans do initially is they remove obstacles to healing, like fear, despair, hopelessness, loneliness. And they construct healing ceremonies and rituals. They're like the choreographers of the rituals within ceremony. They explore and work with the patient's belief system, and they surround the patient with loving compassion and the optimism of community members. So I asked, in this hut, could you sit Juan Fidel up? And that was a struggle, but they got him onto a stool sitting across from me. And we gathered community members to surround us. And the rule that I gave to everyone is that we must have positive thoughts in our minds, all of us. No pleading for his health, no frightened prayers. Instead, just a gentle smile on our face while we envision the final product, a healed and healthy man. So we gathered people around. And the first thing we did then was I gave a meditation, or a prayer, if you will, of gratitude for the healing that was about to occur. I learned that amongst Native people. At the front end of a healing, you give thanks for what is going to happen. You do the same at the end for what has then just happened. But that little gesture imparts hope. It gets rid of some of the obstacles to healing. It gives some faith in the procedures to come. It allows some suggestion to enter in. So we're sharing smiles to enlist a good influence over matter, mind over matter. We're talking epigenetics now. And I asked Juan Fidel, who makes you smile? And he said, my eldest son. I said, well, imagine him now. And imagine a smile on your son's face. And from the look of desperation on Juan Fidel, we saw a smile come forward. A smile came onto his face. I pulled my chair up close. My knees touched his. And in Achuar society, men don't touch men unless it's for fighting purposes. But our knees were now touching as we looked at each other. I pointed to my eyes and encouraged him to look into my eyes and see the affection I had and the concern I had for him, and also the bit of a smile on my face. Then my hands rested on my knees. Juan Fidel reached out and grabbed my hands and squeezed hard. You could feel the fear, and he was looking at me like, you're my last hope. I know I'm dying. Save me. And so I had to move him further and further away from the desperation. So I pulled his head to mine, and I tried to change his internal state and distract him from his fear by creating a vibration in my body, which then spread to his body. Pretty soon we were both vibrating. This is mystery that I was adding to the equation. And mystery is always a part of Indigenous healing, because mystery implies unlimited possibilities. It taps into the unknown, and anything can happen at a time like that. I even threw in what you would probably call an incantation. I was using my foreign language of English. I was speaking in Anishinaabe. The folks in Ontario, that's the language of the Ojibwa. And I asked for Juan Fidel to join me in the words I was saying, positive words that evoked positive images for me. And I had Juan Fidel say them louder and louder and louder. I said to Stephen, quick, get my backpack. He ran and got it. And in it, I dug out a vitamin C pill and a yellow CoQ10 antioxidant. And I said to Juan Fidel through the interpreter, I have some medicine here from the West. I said, it may take 30, 40 minutes for you to feel the results, but it should relieve your pain. So be patient with me. And a number of other things were done, but we ended up closing this segment with words of thanks and told Juan Fidel that we would have a sucking extraction ceremony that night with Raphael to finish off the healing. Juan Fidel stood up. He got on his feet. He walked outside the hut you're looking at, and he looked up to the sky. I held his wrists up, and he gave words of thanks for the healing that had occurred. Now I'm going to fast forward and tell you that the next morning, he was on his way home. He awakened me at my tent and was announcing that he was getting in a canoe and going home, proclaiming that he was healed. So you see on the screen right now some of the elements of Indigenous healing that I just highlighted. And I think they speak for themselves. I've already given examples of each one. But one of the most critical things here is we want to harmonize patients with the world they're living in. We don't want to create adversarial situations like a lot of courtroom drama or real unpleasant yelling matches or confrontations. And importantly, I wanted to include ritual and ceremony because what we call in the West protocols really suggest to people that we're doing something almost magical here. If you do an EMDR or a tapping session, you got protocols galore there. Do some brain spotting. We got protocols. We don't always know what they're about or what makes them work, but if people believe in them, they work. So we want to diminish battles before healing. Well, I went back to Ecuador in July of this year, just over a month ago, and I set out in search of Juan Fidel and got near his home community. And I asked people, does anyone know where Juan Fidel lives? And I was told no. And then somebody said, I know Juan Fidel and where his home is, but he doesn't live there anymore. He died. He died 7 to 10 days ago, I hear. Well, of course, I was crestfallen. I felt horrible. I wondered, have I done something really unethical by stepping up to the plate, as Raphael had suggested? And I wanted to go see his family. So with my guides, we got into the canoe and we went looking for his home. We docked the canoe at the base of a little hill. We climbed up the hill and we saw a hut. It was the hut of Juan Fidel. And there he was standing, looking toward us, awaiting us. He had a dream the night before that I was coming. So he put on his dress shirt and he was there to greet us. I gave him a gift of tobacco he put in his pocket, and he did something that Achuar men generally don't do. They touch. We hugged. We embraced. I cried. I was so happy to see him well. He was so happy to see me, and he wanted to introduce me to his family. So they had gathered in anticipation of me coming. Certain ancient healing tenets seem to be etched in time. They're just eternally valuable. And it's important to always include the biggest of them all, the sacred, the spiritual, in all the work we had done and all the work we are about to do. We have to consider using the medicines of the people we're working with and ask ourselves, what constitutes medicine? Is medicine a pill, an atypical antipsychotic, an SSRI, an anti-anxiety med, a mood stabilizer, a salve, an injection, a surgical extraction? What is medicine? And when you saw the picture of this Quechua girl come onto your screen, and as you look at her, I wonder how you felt. I wonder if anyone went, "Aw." I wonder if a feeling went through your body of pleasantness, of goodness, in fact, of healing. Now imagine if you had a circle of people looking at you, as Juan Fidel did, with a gentle smile, such as this little girl brought to me. I wonder what the impact would be on you. You see, medicine is spirit, more than it's a chemical made by Pfizer or Merck or Eli Lilly. Most importantly, medicine is that feeling of being connected to others. So when you think of doing one-on-one psychotherapy with people, you're getting away from the ancient tradition of healing in community. It's what the word sacred really implies: connectedness. And I find in the rainforest, family is regarded as the rainforest, not just the people, not just the blood relatives, the cousins, the uncles, the fathers, mothers, and so on. No, the rainforest is the relatives. The Lakota might say matakiasan, which means all my relatives. That could include the plants, the animals, the rocks, also known as the grandfathers. But these are the medicines, and all of nature is infused with its own type of healing spirit. It may come from a child, it may come from a plant, the company of an animal, children like this beautiful girl in front of you. Most importantly, though, it's that feeling of belonging and being connected to something larger, bigger, more powerful than yourself. That's the healing power of spirit. That's jungle medicine. I think of the Oglala Lakota chief Red Cloud. Red Cloud once said, "Don't send us your white medicine. We don't need it. We need medicine that walks. We need medicine that walks." So now, look at this little girl who walks. And since looking at her, have you felt her medicine, I ask of you? I suspect you have. I went off to another community along the Amazon and was going off to a ceremony. And everyone is dressed up for the ceremony. And I saw these two little girls walking in front of me, and I walked to catch up with them. And as I did, I saw them ascending these steps, and they reached out and put their arms around each other. And what came to my mind is that's the medicine. That is the medicine of the jungle. And we can't move away from that in the work we do. So when I work with patients nowadays, I say to them, if we have an appointment next week, and I did this with a patient yesterday, if we have an appointment next week, who are you going to bring with you? Who do you want to bring with you? And she said, I have to bring several of my girlfriends. Otherwise, I may forget the importance of what we do here. I need their strength. I said, we'll circle up then. Bring them next week. We'll heal in community. There's a concept that Raphael and other shamans introduced me to, and that's the concept of the third eye, that extra way of seeing, that additional way of knowing. It's the concept that there's an extra way of viewing the world and working with people that can come to us when, as they say, your third eye is activated. Well, the morning after Stephen and I had seen Juan Fidel, the sky broke. It became clear, and we knew a plane could very well come in and fly in and take us out of the jungle. And as the sky cleared, I looked up, and I saw what looked to me like an eye in the sky. And I wondered, is this a symbol to me of the third eye? Well, of course it was. And I think of Chief Seattle's words when I'm out in nature healing people. You know, Chief Seattle is attributed saying with a lot of things, some of which I suspect are true and some of which might be a bit exaggerated. But he was supposedly said, the earth and myself are of one mind. And of course, you can see on the screen now Woody Allen's take on that, which is, I am at two with nature. In other words, a lot of us are afraid of going back out into nature, let alone the jungle, let alone getting down and dirty. But when we plant our feet on Mother Earth, when we are connected with the electromagnetic field of the earth, when we maybe muddy our feet, our bare feet, in some water and sit by the spray of a waterfall with its negative ions that eliminate depression, then we see that there is a healing power and an unspoken wisdom in nature. So as May Sarton said, everything that slows us down and forces patience, everything that sets us back into the slower cycles of nature is help. That then is medicine. That is nature. You've heard me emphasize the role of ritual and ceremony. Here, Stephen and I visited a healer in the Andes. We're up now at some altitude. And there was a very typical looking sweat lodge, as so many of us are familiar with in Canada or the US. There too, sweat lodge rituals within a healing ceremony are commonly used, because rituals seem to hold tradition, and they hold history, they hold story, they hold hope within them. Once a ritual within a ceremony starts unfolding, we can get swept away from it. If you just think of going into maybe a Catholic church or an Episcopalian church with all the rituals that are there, the traditional congregant will probably feel an immediate change in feeling, in spirit, in attitude, entering into that atmosphere. Rituals help lift us up and move people with hopefulness and expectation that's embedded within them, and they guide us into healing. So wherever I go, except generally in the US, we see ritual and ceremony being used. In our counseling offices, ritual oftentimes looks like getting out the disclosure statement and sort of Mirandizing our patients. It may be getting them a cup of coffee or a bottle of water. It may be the collecting of the paycheck at the end of session. But we're really short on rituals. And I think one of the reasons why things like brain spotting, tapping, EMDR are so popular these days is they're loaded with rituals in those healing ceremonies. We call them protocols. And the founder of the EMDR movement said, never deviate from the protocols. And so when a patient sees the protocols beginning, they fall into, or they sort of slide into, this self-healing mode. As with Juan Fidel, their inner healer is awakened, the inner doctor comes alive, and they remember the state of wellness, and the ritual and ceremony carry them back to that. It's amazing where all the wisdom comes from. It can come from the elders. Here I was in a camp, a Hadzabe Bushman camp in Tanzania, and the little dogs were listening to the elder dog kind of give them the word that day. But sometimes you find that Indigenous people really listen to the animals and the teachings that come from them. They watch them carefully. They tap into the consciousness, the mood-altering effects of plants. They certainly listen to and revere the elders, even the deceased ancestors, because they all inform healing. And I can recall living in Bighorn, Wyoming. Down the road from me, down Mead Creek Road, lived a guy named Buck Brannaman, also known as the Horse Whisperer from the movie. And he taught me so much while watching him work with horses who had been abused and mistreated. And he had this old ethic that he said, you can kick the spirit out of a puppy, but it's mighty hard to kick it back in. And so with the people we work with, who sometimes there are ways we don't like, the people who have abused others, beaten others, sexually assaulted others, we sometimes bring a spirit of punitiveness and judgment and shame that only entrenches them further in the ways of violence and the ways of crime. Buck and other cowboys have this old adage that I quote here. It says, if you teach an animal, or for that matter, a human, a lesson by meanness or cruelty, don't be surprised if the animal remembers the meanness and the cruelty, but forgets the lesson. Now, our culture would have us punish and punish and punish so many of the people we work with. And we can't do that. We still have to bring love, compassion, and yes, even humor into the healing environment. This female shaman took a look at Stephen in the Andes and said, "Your shoulder looks like it's causing you problems. Sit down, I'll work with you." And I don't remember Stephen if she was in her 80s or approaching 90, but she wrestled with Stephen, who's not a small person, and worked with his shoulder and smiled and laughed with us. She brought humor, as you can see on her face, into the healing situation. And I learned from Indigenous people that both sides of the coin, so to speak, belong in the healing environment. So where there's something profane that has happened, it's our task as healers to bring in the spiritual and the sacred. Where there's been darkness and despair, we have to bring hope and even laughter. That doesn't mean we take lightly some of the violent things that we've witnessed, that our clients have undergone. Instead, we sort of lighten their load a bit. We're somewhat playful at times. If you are familiar with the Lakota culture, the Lakota, Dakota, and Natoka, they all believe that a lightness and some humor, in fact, some playful teasing is essential to society. Native people are teasing each other all the time. It's a sign of intimacy. It's almost the social glue. And as Vine Deloria once wrote, it's essential to being alive. It's an essential part of the Lakota way of life to tease one another and hold society together that way. It eases confrontations then when they become necessary. It gets people ready for that. Or as my friend George Goodstriker once said, it's the WD-40 of healing, to add the humor. I'm going to close with this. I was boarding a plane for Africa, and a woman sat down next to me on the plane, and we had that cursory conversation that you always have with someone next to you. And she said, "Who are you? Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, I'm Jerry, and I'm going to Tanzania." And she said, "Oh, you must be a missionary." Oh, my mother would have wished for that. But I thought about it for a while, and I said, "Yes, I am." Because what I do, I said to her, is I go to other cultures, and I try and learn about their sacred healing ways. I try to learn about their spirituality, get close to them and realize how their belief system serves to heal their society, their members of their community, how it lifts them up. And then I bring that information home. I bring that so-called primitive wisdom home. So I said to the woman on the plane, "Yes, I guess I am a missionary, but I would say I practice reverse missionary work." And so I'm going to leave you with a challenge to figure out through today's story what ethics you've slid away from, which ones you need to go back to. And never, I say to you, never forget the ancient wisdom traditions. And I've tried to explain them in Ancient Ethics for Today's Healers. But here you're looking at another shaman who I just met 2 months ago in the jungle. This is not Raphael. This is another Achuar shaman. And with us in the embrace, something that Achuar men don't do with one another too much of, whenever possible, I want you to team up with heart-centered colleagues, no matter where you find them, and no matter how different their exterior appears. So with that, I'm going to flip it back to you, Stephen, for our Q&A time.
I didn't put on my makeup today. I didn't know this was going to happen. So, Jerry, first of all, thank you. I think, as I listen to this, the way you speak, too often I think we're cramming in as many facts into a presentation as we can, rational, logical facts. And of course, there's a place for that. And in a world of managed care and time-constrained practice and justifying everything by the number of sessions, to bring in the way you speak, a sense of timelessness, of spirit, of love, of compassion, of a sort of timelessness, if you will, and a healing, and challenge the field to say, what about that? Where is that talked about anymore? Have we lost something really precious in our practice in the drive for economic efficiency? Is really a challenging thing to hear, and I think you do it in such a beautiful way. So thank you for your presentation. It's time for your questions. So if you haven't had time to yet send me any, please do. I have some that have already been sent, so let me throw them at you. And maybe the first one is a segue from what I said about managed care, that these are all wonderful messages. I'm in a managed care practice. You know, I have time, DSM diagnostics, efficiency things that in my agency. How do I possibly introduce the sense of time and sacred and healing that you're talking about into a managed care or into modern day practice?
It's it's an important question, and it requires a lot of thinking and sometimes some compromise. I'm going to take you back to my home in Wyoming, and I used to do, and I still do, I've done them this summer, week-long intensives with patients, where I'm with a patient from morning till dark, working 10, 11 hours a day with one patient. Well, you wonder sometimes, is that only for the wealthy? And what I've found is that with some insurance companies, if we tell them through the pre-authorization process that I'm going to be substituting intensive inpatient care for a week of intensive treatment with a patient, I have gotten, for instance, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Wyoming, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Montana, to pre-approve payment. So when I send in the bill with DSM coding, CPT coding for 10 hours, 10 different sessions per day, amazingly, I've gotten that approved. Now, that doesn't always happen. I don't think everyone will be able to work that with that level of intensity. But what I've also found is that I can no longer see patients back to back to back, hour after hour. It leaves me no time for planning, no time for reflection. I can't open someone up a trauma or a wound and then zip them back together in the span of 45 minutes. Life doesn't work that way. Healing doesn't work that way. So to be very frank with you, I'm making less money in my practice now than I ever have before. I'm seeing better results, and I feel like I'm part of something that has some purpose and meaning far beyond the way my services have been managed in the past, not only by myself, but by insurance companies.
Thank you. I have another question for you. Somebody's saying that they've had some experience with alternative healers in their community, borrowing rituals and techniques from Native American cultures. And they have referred to these people sometimes as wannabes in the past. And their methods trouble them, as it seems that these folks aren't qualified to use tribal medicines without appropriate training and approval, and in some ways are sort of, being disrespectful to a culture by just trying to borrow bits and pieces from it to use as they see fit. And what's your take on that?
Well, first of all, I devoted an entire chapter to that concept in Ancient Ethics about appropriation of rites and ceremonies. And I think a lot of us want to romanticize Indigenous healing and bring it on home, packaged the same way in which we saw it, creating rituals that are taken from Zimbabwe and put in Manhattan. And that isn't always going to work. In fact, I'm suggesting that instead of wanting to be like other people and other cultures, that instead we can create some of our own rituals and ceremonies, and better than that, patients can work with us to create meaningful ceremonies of their own making. and then they may even have deeper meaning. So if we can move away from trying to look like the shamans in my slides today, if we can dispense with this need to be dramatic and entertaining at the same time, if we can dispense with ego in the healing process and not have it all about me and my ceremonial ways, and focus very attentively on the patient, then we're honoring these traditions, but adapting them to the ways of the community we're in and the ways of the patient we're serving.
Thank you. Here's another question for you. It's a therapist who's saying that, they are overseen by a whole lot of people. There are supervisors, there are agency regulations, there are, oversight groups that they have to be accountable for. What about shamans? Do they have any ethical guidelines or groups that oversee them?
Well, maybe I should start by answering that question with something you said to me in the jungle, Stephen. I remember there was almost like an Ali Hardy moment where you were scratching your head going, Jerry, this is some fine mess you've gotten us into. When I sat down with Juan Fidel to begin the healing, and I could sense you pulling away, and you even made a remark to me, as you may recall, that Jerry, when you get home, you might have some licensing issues to address with what I saw happening here, to which I responded by saying, Stephen, if you get home, word will get out about this. But I said, why don't we do a webinar on it and blow it out in the open for learning? Okay, back to the original question. I've been in Swaziland and in working with Zulu Sangomas, which are shamans, and they have oversight groups. They have the equivalent of licensing authorities. Shamans come together, they congregate, and they even have levels of practice, like level 1, 2, and 3. So what they've done, recognizing there are black shamans, there are dark healers and exploitive people in the healing community, they have had to, for lack of a better word, police their own people. So there are oversight committees, even in remote areas.
Interesting. Let's see, another question. The questioner says, I get nervous when you use the word sacred magic. While I know you're not recommending trickery or sleight of hand, what does sacred magic look like, and how does it hold ethical integrity?
That was a term I used in the book Ancient Ways. And the truth of the matter is, we all use a certain amount of mysticism or magic, a little bit of theatrics in the work we do. We don't always call it magic. But if you walk into a clinic and you see all kinds of machines and procedures that you're unfamiliar with, we don't always know what's working. But we believe in the magic that's represented by all these techniques and ceremonies. There is some sleight of hand that I've watched shamans use. Sleight of hand, when it's done in the right way, though, to me is sacred. In other words, it takes into account what is best for that patient and how to get them past the point of disbelief into opening up to all possibilities. So they have some activities, some sacred magic they'll use sometimes to help that client shift gears and believe in new possibilities for health. The key is this, though. We have to have clear, clean, good intentions. This isn't about entertainment. This is about helping a client shift the paradigm and believe that healing is possible. So in the Ojibwa territory, they may look up at the sky and appeal to the great mystery. They don't say God. They refer to Gishi Manitou, great mystery, which means the great unknown. And there's magic sometimes, there's mystery in this world that we have to tap into sometimes to help people heal.
Do you ever involve Indigenous healers in your practice, whether directly or indirectly?
I always have. I love doing that. They can say things, see things much better than I. But, I've had an Apache man, a Northern Cheyenne man working for me. We've brought in people from the Canadian border all the way down to Wyoming to participate in healings. People from Manitoba, the Hollow Water First Nation, came to Wyoming to be a part of healings. And I tell you, that is so powerful when they arrive, especially when the patient wasn't sure if they were in fact going to be supported in that way. And to have the native healers descend into the healing circle lends a certain amount of sacredness and seriousness to the procedure. And then we've got that potentiation effect going on, Steve, where you have the power of one when we do our typical one-on-one counseling in the West. But when you bring in 2 people, natives say that's the power of 4. You bring in 4 people, that's the power of 8. So when 2 van loads of healers came from Hollow Water, Manitoba, and showed up in my office one day in Sheridan, Wyoming, when I worked there, we had an incredible healing event that was most certainly going to unfold. So I try to involve them whenever possible.
So here's the last question, if you could respond to it briefly. Do you find the language of psychiatry and the language of Indigenous healers influence the way services are delivered?
That took a whole chapter for me to address in the new book, Ancient Ethics. Yes, it definitely influences things. When all you have are nouns to work with, people are going to get nouned. And in my talks, I oftentimes refer to noun sense, the way in which labels limit people and how we see them. In Anishinaabe language, in the Mi'kmaq language, they're heavily laden with verbs, which implies movement, change, unfolding, evolving. When our language is replete with verbs and only has minimal nouns, as is the case in some native tongues, then it's implied to people that change is going to happen. Change is the order of the day. So I think, we have to be very careful of nouning people and stopping their development from unfolding.
Great. Jerry, thank you. This has been a very powerful and interesting conversation that's so different than conversations we typically have. If you see me, I'm not sure whether I'm still on screen or not, but
You're on.
I keep looking around because I have a 6-week-old puppy here that just disappeared and is whining. Anyway, so I apologize. Just a few closing remarks for everybody, and thank you for being with us during this webinar. I just want everybody to know about our monthly newsletter where we look at, it's called Research to Practice, and David Prescott, Joan, Tabachnick, and I produce it every month, and we look at certain relevant research in the field and try to make it practical in a quick, easy to read format. We've automatically signed everybody up who is signed up for the webinar. You'll be getting the next newsletter. You can always click to get rid of us if you want to unsubscribe. A couple of other reminders. We will once again be posting the PowerPoint and a recording of the webinar by next week and send you a certificate of completion. As well, though, we are going to be able to offer CEs for this. I was mistaken, so we are going to do that. Greg, if you post the URL on the screen, that would be great. And we'll also post this on our website, so for those of you who want to get CE credits, you'll be able to do that. And if you like the webinar, you can also see previous webinars by going to nearypress.org and clicking on our webinar series. Just a word for those of you who are interested in future webinars. Robin Wilson will be presenting on October 21st on intellectual disability and problems in sexual behavior. A quick thank you to all of our sponsors. This is a pitch again. We'd love to have 2 or 3 slides worth of sponsors. We do rely on donations in order to produce this so that we can offer it to you for free. Okay, so let me read our list of our sponsors. The ITM Group, James R. Reynolds, the Massachusetts Department of Mental Health, New Hope Treatment Centers, Rancho Arlo Society, Stevens Treatment Programs, Wayne County Juvenile Probation Department in Pennsylvania, Yerrick Counseling, and our newest sponsor is Maple Tree Group Home Incorporated. Thanks to all of you for helping us put this all together. Just a final reminder, and if you are interested in sponsoring, it's $98 for individuals and $250 for organizations, and you can have as many people as you like attending the webinar if you're an organization. And you can let us know at info@nearypress.org, or you can call us at 413-540-0712, extension 14. Now I'm really starting to sound like NPR's fundraising effort here.
Stephen, how about another pitch for the October Framingham workshop?
Oh, please, go for it.
For those who live in the New England area and are interested in this concept of ancient ethics and ancient healings, along with post-traumatic growth, I'll be doing a workshop to support NEARY's in the NEARY Training Center in Framingham, Mass, October 17, and you can go to NEARY for additional information on that.
Great. I'm glad you mentioned that, Jerry. It'll be a lot of fun to spend the day with you again, and I'm sure we'll all emerge from that experience the richer for having spent the day with you. If you need, just a reminder, if you need a certificate of completion, just wait, and one will be sent to you next week. And then we'll also be announcing the slides and when the recordings have been posted. Please don't forget to sign off so that we can send you your evaluation form. Thanks to everybody for being part of this webinar today. Jerry, always a pleasure. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your thoughts with us, and hope to see many of you at our next webinar later in October. Bye now.
Miigwech.